Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this 5th of December meeting of the District Plan Review Subcommittee. Welcome to anyone online. Welcome to our planner, Katrina, who's joining us on the interweb from the UK, and for members of the public in the chambers. Do we have any apologies?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Mayor is away on business elsewhere and he said he might zoom in, but I think it would be appropriate to put in an apology for him, just in case. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll move then that we accept the Mayor's apology, seconded by Councillor Blackler. All those in favour? Carried. For any declarations of interest or conflict by members of the subcommittee? There are none. We then move on to item 3.1 in the agenda. Mr. Campbell, would you like to introduce this, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this report is a fairly brief report following the last subcommittee meeting in mid-November. So we have had a chance to explore some other options, look at other plan provisions, the Gore plan example that was discussed. We've had a limited engagement with Ōkaha. Given the time constraints, they have come back to us on a couple of things, but not on another. So we are limited in what we can, I guess, put forward. So essentially the key change we have recommended is changing the definition that relates to a policy or an objective in particular. So it's the Reka-Tere-Taka definition. So it talks about the involvement of mana whenua in decision making, and that's related to issues that affects the lands that they may look after, or the resources they may have an interest in. So it clarifies that it's not about the management of other resources, private resources issues. So it does clear up that issue that seems to have arisen. We have looked at the issue around access, which we think is fairly clearly spelled out both in the policy that supports the SASM Objective 5 and also the additional wording that was put in at the request of this subcommittee around Trespass Act and other public access rights. In terms of the rules, one of the key ones that's come up relates to the triggers for consulting with Rūnaka in terms of the earthworks in residential and settlement areas, which are fairly limited in terms of where the overlay intersects those parts of the district. Many of those areas do already have housing on them, but there are still vacant sites that could be developed. So the threshold may be triggered. It's 300 square metres. The other threshold for earthworks within 20 metres of a water body wouldn't really come up much in those urban situations and is sort of a recognised standard anyway. So we have gone back and said, well, potentially if there was a conjunctive part of the rule where it was 300 square metres and greater than the 1.5 fill or cut depth, then that might sort of eliminate some potential need to consult with iwi on those matters. They're still getting advice on that and come back to us, so it could be dealt with through a staff submission. The mapping issue, as we know, has been back and forth. We still advocate for them to look at that, but to date there's been no further changes since those made earlier in the year. Again, they have indicated they'll be able to deal with those through any submission process once the plan's notified. So unfortunately that hasn't been able to progress any further, but we still continue to reinforce that message to them. So happy to answer any questions. I know it's been a short time frame between the last meeting and getting this report together, but we have had a chance to look at things that won't address all concerns, but it tries to clarify things and maybe with the small change suggested, make some improvements. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll just make the comment that, again, I'm disappointed that Akaha haven't had the resources to come back to us, because once again, the ratepayers are going to have to defend a position through the process that I would have thought that we would have had a political solution to here rather than go down that track. But is there any members of the subcommittee have comments on this paper? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, Mr. Chair, you'll be aware that I moved the resolution at the last meeting to reconsider some aspects of this chapter. And I initially provided Mr. Campbell with 12 pages of arguments, which I tried to predicate on planning principles. It's not a matter of just saying I don't like things or we don't like things, ergo they should change. I'm frankly disappointed that officers continue, in my view, to take a position with regard to one party involved in this planning process that doesn't apply to others. It is clear under Section 6 of the Act that matters of the relationship of Maori to their ancestral lands and treasures clearly is something that they or persons who would have expertise in that area are entitled to identify. But there are other aspects of the SESM and the overlay, particularly insofar as the fact that it actually traverses a range of zones, not one in particular, that I believe entitle us to consider expertise from other parties and other groups. And it also, I believe we are also entitled to consider, in part of the preparation of this plan, a clear conflict between what may be perceived to be an abrogation of private property rights by way of access and apparently unqualified access to land and assets, and a focus of the new government on greater emphasis on and additional protection of private property rights. Now, what we have been saying to submitters, to members of the community who are concerned about these overlays and who are concerned about some of the objectives and policies and rules is, look, there's a wonderful solution. Make a submission. Come along when the plan is notified and tell us what you think and present a good argument, and we'll look very carefully at changing it. But then Akaha comes along and says, oh, actually, we don't want to do anything now. We as far as we're concerned, correspondence is closed. Everything from now on will be up to us. And we will only engage in the notification and submission process or stage of the process. And we are saying, therefore, that precludes us from making any change to the things that they want. And I'm saying that's a double standard. And I'm saying that if there are things that we want to change that sit outside specialist expertise related to ancestral lands and treasures, then we are entitled to do so. And we are entitled, I think, to raise issues of access and clarification of those that would go further than the resolution that is in front of us here. For instance, in my submission to Mr. Campbell, my suggestion as to Rakatira Taka, the meaning thereof, I suggest that the definition could read, in the context of resource management, the mana or right to negotiate arrangements that would enable ongoing exercise of the relationship between Kaitahu and ancestral lands and resources, including a shared authority to make decisions about how their identified significant sites and areas are used and managed. Now, it's arguable which is better. I think there are other issues regarding access that need to be further clarified. and which I don't think the Section 32 analysis is properly addressed. Because it does seem to me there is a manifest conflict between the expectations normally applicable to, let us say, a residential property in a town or an urban setting, and some of the wording of some of the objectives in the SASM and what they imply. And I believe that we are entitled to clarify some of these matters as we see fit, on the same basis, and our response to OKAHA can and should be the same as it has been to other submitters. If you are unhappy with this, come and tell us at the time that the plan is notified. Oh, and by the way, that's what you said you want to do anyway. So in the meantime, we will make some changes because we think they are appropriate. Now, I'm not presupposing what those changes are, but I am saying this notion that everything must be filtered through the OKAHA filter and everything has to be approved by them. I don't believe that's correct. Now, I believe there are aspects of the SASM that relate to areas of expertise, earthworks for the sake of argument. We've yet to receive the Section 32 analysis gives us no evidence that persons expert in earthworks and the requirements of construction and land use and so on contributed to those rules. So in my view, we are absolutely entitled to make additional changes if we wish. And we can say to OKAHA, you have chosen to disengage. Here are some changes we are making. Feel free to submit on them along with everybody else.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Councillor McCain.
Yeah, I think Jim summed it all up in my feelings, and I think the issues have still not been resolved, and there's no input or assurance, written or otherwise, from Akura, even verbally, that would give any assurance to those on the affected properties that may encompass mutual trust and change further down the track to resolve these issues. I think it, and I'm not a lawyer, but in my understanding, it does transgress Section 6 and 32 of the RMA respectively, with lack of consultation with the affected properties and any financial considerations further down the track. It also ignores the request for satisfactory decision-making and costing timelines should this go further and consents be required for these people to actually do further stuff on their property. There's none of that here at all. And in that case, we're a regulatory authority. I don't think we have the right to make that decision today.
Is there anyone else wanting to make comment? Mr. Campbell, do you have a response to those thoughts?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the difficulty we've got with various parties that have informed the plan, whether it's hazards experts, landscape architects, iwi authorities, is that they're giving us their best advice based on their experience elsewhere, and on that particular issue that they're providing that advice on. And we have had changes to the SASM maps earlier this year. We have had feedback on some of these matters in front of us today, given the tight time frame, and they haven't been able to advise on one other matter. So the issue is that they can't then turn around and submit if they're giving advice right through the process. It sort of puts them in a difficult position in terms of experts that we're relying on to inform these parts of the plan. So we have to be careful in that respect. If there's requests to change provisions, alter maps, etc., that come through, then they could advise on, yes, that is appropriate, or no, it's not for these reasons. And that's part of that next phase of advising a hearings panel. And the hearings panel would look at both sides of the argument for and against the particular relief sought. In terms of being able to change provisions now, I mean, we have suggested one change. It gets quite difficult to keep tweaking provisions. Many of these are aligned with other recently notified plans. There's perhaps some slight wording differences, but the meaning's the same. We do have to be careful in terms of, I guess, changing the the meaning of certain terms like Rangatirataka in terms of what it means to Maori in terms of their giving it. It's their authority that they're saying how we exercise that relationship, and they are clear that it's not about influencing other resources that aren't of interest to them, and that's what the wording is trying to state anyway. I'm still not sure where the access issue. I mean, we can keep adding more and more explanation and text till the cows come home, but I think it's pretty clear what we've got there now. There's nothing there that says they have unfettered or other rights of access that other people don't have. And certainly in urban context, I don't imagine there'd be much need for them or desire for them to want to access urban properties where, yes, there might be a SASM layer there, but there may not be too much there for them to want to access, but there might be things under the ground or relationships that they might want to be acknowledged through that consent process if earthworks were triggered. There may not be anything there. It's just for them to check before the earthworks are done, and anything may or may not be destroyed. So it's really a trigger point. It's not saying that they're going to come in and take over a development or a property. It's a trigger point to say, hey, we want to have a quick look at this before anything happens or may inadvertently get damaged. So they're not there to kind of stop things in their tracks. It's just to have a chance to have a look in terms of that earthworks trigger. In many cases with the urban environment, things have been disturbed, modified in any cases. So we don't expect there to be too many issues in those areas that are mapped. And I've listed the various settlements there where it applies. And it's not all of those townships either, pretty limited. Otherwise, it is a difficult position. I know it's caused a lot of tension. We are well aligned with other plans in terms of these provisions. So, everyone's prepared to look at them as it goes through the process. That's probably the key step, is to say we've got them to a point where it is pretty consistent with what's provided elsewhere. And there still is a process to refine and reconsider if need be, acknowledging the Ōkaha limitations they have flagged, which we can't really do much about.
No, appreciate that. The themes that I'm being exposed to is, one, the concern about another layer of bureaucracy and cost to anyone who's wanting to do something on their freehold title. And secondly, from our own plan point of view, it's fine being aligned with other district plans, but there also needs to be a consistency in our own plan. Now, when we went through the chapter relating to historic buildings, we gave landowners the option, if they had not been consulted, to opt out of that provision. Even this morning, I've received an email from a landowner who is saying, we have not been visited or consulted by iwi, therefore we are not prepared or we don't wish this to be on our property until that takes place. So I'm trying to find a way that is equitable, that covers those concerns, but also sends a message to Ōkaha that it is not our responsibility that they don't have the planning firepower, and it should not be up to our ratepayers to bear that cost. We did have some discussions previously, I know, of council trying to maybe facilitate a joint way of liaising with these matters. Has that had any further consideration?
Yes, so we have an example service level agreement that a council north of here has with a different iwi consultation agency. So that would form the basis of what we went to Ōkaha with. Once the plan is notified, we can say, here's the arrangement we have with Ōkaha going forward. And I think Alex C has mentioned about sort of, how we resource that as well, but certainly it's something they're prepared to look at, and it would benefit all parties going forward, particularly council, when we're processing any applications. So that's definitely a way to help kind of navigate that issue around when something's triggered. What's the next step? What's the expected timeframe, cost, etc. Just going back to the matter around the heritage kind of provision there, that's around the category B items only. So it is, well, I guess, a subset of the overall heritage, but there's kind of no hierarchy, similar hierarchy to the SESMs.
No, thank you. Councillor McCain.
I'll just reinforce what you're saying, and this is our district plan for our district and our rate pass, and I think we're losing sight of that a wee bit where we start following outside the area. We've got to look after those people that pay our bills. Verbal assurances or assumptions do not cut it with me in a regulatory system. It must be the written word, so we have a page. It's all very well we can agree in this room with what's being said, but 10 years down the track or 8 years down the track before it gets revisited, might mean something, a completely different interpretation. Look at this as the Treaty of Waitangi right now. That's 100 years ago, and they're still arguing the point of the way it was said. So it's got to be written, it's got to be cut and dusted and clean, and then we can move on. But until then, I will not support any of this.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, look, I'll foreshadow that I'll like to move the resolution in front of us for recommendation and some others in a moment or two, with your permission. But I would also like to ask Mr. Campbell some questions, if you'll accept that.
If Mr. Campbell's willing to answer them, yes, I will.
Look, they're not intended to be confrontational. David, I'm curious to know, in my assessment of the SASM chapter, I did cite the fact that Gore has made this quite spectacular change and created a totally new zone, NC, I can't remember, sorry, I think it's NC TV or anyway, they've created a completely new zone. I'm not aware that Ōkaha has responded negatively, or indeed has responded at all, to that change, which seems to me quite substantial. And I did raise a point in my comments on the chapter that I wondered if this did actually comply with the requirements in Section 6 of the Act. Are you aware of any response from Ōkaha to what has been proposed in Gore?
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. The Gore situation is largely covered by Te Ao Marama Inc., the equivalent consultancy in Invercargill, so it covers Southland, Runanga. I don't think they have too much issue with it because it actually covers the whole Gore district, which is quite small, but instead of mapping discrete areas of interest, they've said, well, all of this district is of interest, and they have a series of rules, a bit like earthworks and other things that would be triggered for consultation. So it is actually more broad brush than our current SASM provisions. And I know that Runanga have said, the whole Waitaki district is of interest to them, but they have decided to, narrow it down quite a lot to the mapped areas. So I don't know, we would want to quite go to the extent of the Gore model of having a layer that applies across the whole Waitaki district and rules that would require consultation regardless, because you're in an area that's, well, the whole district's applied.
Look, thank you. But in theory, you're saying, you said, I don't know whether we want to go quite that far, but in theory, are you suggesting that we could?
Yes, we could. I imagine if we did that, we'd have quite a lot more landowners turning up and be concerned if they had to be, a certain rule was triggered and they had to consult where it may or may not have any cultural values. Yeah.
There's a couple of other questions, if I may. Ms. Campbell, I also, you made the point, and thank you very much for your considered and lengthy response to what I wrote. You made the point that the Section 6 of the Act includes the word shall recognise and provide for, and shall in RMA terms means it must be done. But is it fair to say that the Act, although it says that we must recognise and provide for these matters of national significance, including sites and areas of significance to Maori, The Act is silent on how we recognise and provide. Is that a reasonable presumption? It doesn't stipulate how we do that.
Yeah, it is a bit difficult because of the other parts of the Act, particularly in the Section 8 treaty matters, and also the, I guess, relationship that iwi have been given through the Act to resource management. So it's basically saying that if you're providing for those matters, then you engage with them to say, how would you like those matters to be recognised and provided for in the plan? The Gore example is a good example where they've said, well, let's just ring fence the whole district and do it this way. Most other districts I'm aware of, they have said, well, we've only got certain parts of the district we're really interested in, and here they are. And Ngāi Tahu have done that across the area they have an interest in, which is most of the South Island. So they have their cultural mapping for all of the South Island. There are areas that we're aware of that sit outside that, and they might be for valid reasons like silent files, that type of thing, where they don't want to disclose where they might be. So what they've said to us is, look, here's the areas we're interested in. There's been some small scale changes to those. And here are the type of provisions or things that we want to have included in the plan that say how we want to be involved in looking after those, where those resources are. Outside of that, we're not too interested in getting involved in resource management beyond that. So that they are trying to, I guess, refine it down to where it is of particular interest. Beyond that, not so much in terms of plan provisions.
Mr. Campbell, I'm glad you mentioned Section 8 because that was another question I wanted to ask you. We know that there are treaty settlements, and we know there are provisions within those treaty settlements and limitations imposed by the Crown on its willingness to resolve historic grievances in terms of present land use and property rights, if you will. Does Section 8 indicate that the Act requires local government to go further than the Crown in terms of resolving historic issues? In other words, if the Crown chooses to say, yes, we will settle, but we will not affect private title, the only land that will be resolved or at issue in treaty settlements will be Crown land or land we own. Is it correct to assume that Section 8 either places the same restraint on local authorities, or does the Act actually require us to go further than the Crown?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hopkins. It's a very important distinction and a valid one to raise, I think, for all parties. The settlement aspect is covered outside of the RMA, and there are still, discussions happening at that level with government and parties around what has been settled or what could be settled in future outside of that. Section 8 talks about taking into account the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, so it does go beyond settlement matters. That's relating to where Crown land is due for sale or disposal. It's a buyback in terms of that aspect. The settlement aspect doesn't cover resource management or planning provisions that may affect Crown or private land. It's irrespective of that. So Section 8 is about how we acknowledge those principles, and then it refers back to the Section 6 in terms of the recognise and provide for. So there is that distinction. There's a lot of case law around what the principles mean, and I think there's been discussion in the resource management reform space around trying to refine that further going forward, so it will be a lot clearer. But at this stage, all we're doing is basically following known kind of case law and practice in terms of enacting that for our district plan within the bounds of the Resource Management Act. But knowing that settlements sit outside that, we have statutory acknowledgement areas that were part of settlements that include largely the likes of the Waitaki River, Kakanui River, etc. They're also captured by the SASMs, but have a different process because they're statutory acknowledgement areas largely around the use of the water resource per se.
But okay, Would it, however, okay, you're saying that the matter is, if you like, unresolved or at the moment potentially ambiguous, and people are trying to seek clarification and refinement. But would it be a reasonable presumption that local government exercising its requirements under the Act to create district plans, would it be a reasonable presumption that local government could construe that an appropriate interpretation of how to implement the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi would be to follow the Crown's example? And if the Crown approaches that issue in its treaty settlements in a certain manner and imposes certain constraints upon itself in terms of resolving those issues in the most fundamental relationship between the Crown and Maori and their ancestral lands and treasures, would it be appropriate to say that that we are entitled to interpret how to implement the principles of the treaty and use the Crown as our template?
Yeah, I'm not sure we can quite go that far in terms of settlement. Yeah, using that as an example, but I guess, the key thing is it invokes this discussion with iwi on where the identified values may be impacted, as opposed to wanting, a chance to acquire land. That's quite a different thing. And we've heard from Runaka that they're not trying to get away in the way of land use. It's more just having that opportunity to input into any decision making. Clearly, when there's a complete loss or destruction of values, if someone was wanting to completely mine out a rock art site or something like that, that would be a careful decision that any hearings panel or commission would have to make. Weighing up those values, but where it's talking about land use changes that might alter the values but not lose or destroy them, there's a different kind of subtlety there, as opposed to the Crown's relationship is acknowledging that iwi or Runaka might have an interest in acquiring land that has been owned by the Crown, but in doing so the relevant rules of the day would apply to that land, whether it's commercial land or rural land. And many of the Crown land parcels, the properties that have been returned to Ngāi Tahu are commercial properties, so subject to those rules and regulations.
Just with respect to the people mining rock art sites and the like, there are other instruments at our disposal that could absolutely ensure that would not happen without necessarily having a SASM overlay or a range of generic and general rules. Those sites could be identified as heritage sites or historic places. Ngāi Tahu themselves could ask for them to be included in our register. Could they not? And that would surely preserve them as effectively as anything else.
Where there's defined sites that have things on them or within them, they could be listed separately as a heritage item. I guess the SASM includes those and other values as well, whether it's food gathering or previous settlement sites that may not have a defined piece of rock art or something there. A lot of the iwi history has largely been lost in terms of built structures or things. And even where there are urupā, a lot of those are not even covered adequately under the land ownership arrangement.
Last question, but that again, there is a process with which I am familiar, and I'm sure you are as well, where those things can be protected. You can have silent files, can you not? And Waihi Tapu, urupā and other specific sites of that nature can be included in a district plan without necessarily being identified, for the very logical and sensible reason that you don't want grave robbers and looting and that sort of thing occurring. But there is a mechanism by which they can be identified and protected, is there not?
Yes, that's correct. And as I said earlier, that some of the silent file sites have been maybe taken out of the SASM layer for that very reason. So they will have potentially relationships with landowners around those already, I suspect. Or not want to even disclose it to landowners because they might deem it's low risk, but I'll be keeping an eye on those.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I just want to draw back to earlier conversations in this process. The SASM does not overrule the property rights as covered by the Trespass Act. And we specifically asked and had that written into this district plan. That is correct, isn't it?
Yes, I've mentioned that in the report that has been added, and Ōkaha have endorsed that as well. They're happy with that explanation in the plan. It helps them manage access expectations of mana whenua and their members as well. So they're not just bowling up expecting to access land. So it covers it both ways.
The other thing, we're having quite an intense philosophical discussion around this planning exercise, but we do need to acknowledge that we have a very good working relationship with our local rūnaka at Moeraki. It's actually the planning arm that works for them that we're questioning, not our involvement with local iwi. Councillor McCone?
Yeah, David, I know down here with your earthworks part of it, could you explain further on that? 300 square metres of earthworks is not a heck of a lot of soil, considering, and especially when you note further down here in the urban situations, it covers Cape Wombrau, Kakanui, Meraki, Hamden and Shaggs Point, which are all on reasonably sloping ground. That's one. So how does that figure been come to is the first part? And secondly, does that overlap into the earthworks chapter that comes right through from the rest of the chapters outside the SASM?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McCone. So the earthworks figure's been arrived at across the board for the residential settlement zones. We've looked at other benchmarks and it's higher than some other councils.
Microphone, please, councillor.
Does that cover the rural part as well when you say residential? It's just or you're just talking residential at this stage?
Yes, that's only property that has that residential or settlement zoning. Rural, we've bumped that up a lot higher than the threshold. The 300 metres is a tricky one because in most of those areas you can subdivide down to 300 square metres. So it would reflect the maximum on a minimum size site. If you went the earthwork, the whole site, there would be that kind of area. A lot of those sites and those townships or settlements would be bigger than 300. So it's saying that's a reasonable size building platform. Most houses are in that sort of 200-ish square metre range plus driveway. Again, it's a rural threshold to pick up any issues that might arise from larger scale earthworks. We've had a few issues with, runoff, sediment, dust, annoying neighbours, that type of thing, people cutting in, which is the other part of the rule, 1.5 metres. And again, it's only when it's over that limit that we'd trigger the need to consult with iwi. In parts of those settlements, it's not across the whole townships.
But being specific with that, you're actually, in my interpretation, you're actually reducing the right to subdivide properties and further populate that area. Is that correct?
And not quite. The rules, we've rolled over the subdivision rules for residential with the 300 is the same as what we've got now. In those settlements, it was 400 and we've, I think, brought it back to 300. So it gives people the ability to go smaller. And then the earthworks would be, if you're wanting to build a larger sort of building platform or etc., then we'd want to have a look at that. Mainly to deal with those issues that might affect neighbours or runoff that end up on the street, that type of thing.
I'm still confused, David, and where I'm coming from is if you have a, say, hectare section and you want to cut it into 4 and you have to get developed before you'll get consents for the whole lot, how do you fit inside that 300 square metres of earthworks?
Yep. So with the subdivision, if you were subdividing the existing 1 hectare title and you needed to do more than 300 square metres of earthworks, you should need consent. you'll need consent anyway to subdivide, so it will be wrapped up in one consent application, so there's no additional kind of process or cost. All we'd look at is what are the effects of doing more than 300 square metres. Traditionally, it's been things like mud and detritus that end up on our roads and in our stormwater systems. So the engineering team comment on that, keep an eye on that sort of thing, where they're dragging it out into the street. There might be issues around, dust blowing through and affecting neighbours if it's dry on a larger scale. If they've got 4 sites already created, then each of those 4 sites can still do 300 square metres of earthworks later on when they have their own title.
Councillor Percival? Oh, sorry. I'll just give Councillor McCombs right. Why?
Again, so if I may, David, and it says, once you do trigger that, it involves consultation with iwi. Are the timelines and cost factors built into that? Is there a written thing, is it going to take 2 years for this to happen, or is it going to take 2 weeks, or, where do people sit? Because we're talking a lot of money when a lot of this stuff goes on.
Yeah, so what we'd highlight is people to have that discussion with iwi initially. And as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at that service level agreement between council and Kaha, so that we can give certainty around timelines and costs. So if a subdivision or earthworks consent came in for this sort of thing in those areas, we'd say, hey, we want your comments back within this time frame. There's unlikely to be a huge cost if they're just giving comments back on something like that. But we would look to lock that into the agreement.
So there's nothing in writing yet, though.
Councillor Percival?
Yeah, I just need some clarification. If you probably quite simple for you to give. When you're under the rules, you've got this allows a reasonable levy of earthworks for building platform.
Oh, microphone, sorry, Councillor Percival. Yes, please. We enjoyed it so immensely last time.
John's covered one of the questions, but in your explanation for rules, you have this allows a reasonable level of earthworks for a building platform. There's more of a trigger to ensure background checks to be done, blah, blah, blah. Who defines and quantifies what's a reasonable level? And how is that defined by staff? I mean, to me, a reasonable level would be a lot more than what you've got down here at 300. So who defines that, and how is it then put into practice or put into a document which is going to create such, whatever, thank you.
Yep, no, thank you, Councillor Percival. So the minimum size site you can subdivide down to in those areas is 300 square metres for subdivision. So if you had that smallest size section, then you could effectively do earthworks across the whole thing up to 300 square metres. So if your site was 500 square metres and you've got a minimum site coverage anyway, so you can't fill up the whole thing with a house under the plan, then you're still going to be able to do a decent sized building platform, because the rest of the site you have to leave for gardens and site coverage reasons, setbacks, etc. So it's arrived at by kind of looking at what's the general sort of trend of building sizes in residential areas only, we're talking about, not rural, and that's where we've arrived at that figure. We've looked at what other districts have done. Some have gone smaller, so some are less than 300, some are slightly bigger. So we thought, given our minimum site size of 300 anyway, this is enabling people to earthworks the entire site if they went to the smallest possible under the subdivision. Even if they went to 500 or 600, it's still a fair chunk of that site they're going to be digging up under the permitted rule. And as I said to Councillor McCone, if they're doing a subdivision anyway, they're going to need a consent for that. And if they're doing large scale earthworks, then we'll certainly want to have a look at that. And we've had issues with that type of thing in the past in our district. So there is rhyme and reason behind why it's that number.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I think we've covered the discussion fairly comprehensively, but we haven't heard from councillor Blackler and he's got his hand up, so I'll take a question from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to come back to the SASM chapter and the conversation that we've had earlier around the public access aspect and how that links through to that chapter. And if you read the public access objectives 1 and 2 talk about respectively talk about enhancing public and customary access set against public access that minimises adverse effects, which includes like land-based activities and primary production. So I just want to explore and understand if is it just a subdivision consent that would trigger the inclusion of like an esplanade reserve or something and around the objectives of the public access chapter, or would it be a consent of any kind on the property that has that designated kind of public access layer over it, and linking that back to the SASM chapter?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Blackler. It's a good point. I've kind of alluded to it a wee bit in this report around the esplanade strips alongside waterways that come about through the subdivision process. So you're correct that is the normal process where all public access is provided for, and that covers access for fishing game get involved. There's I think it's called Walking Access New Zealand, sort of have a website with all those known access points, etc. So that is the normal mechanism by which that happens. There is the ability through other land use consents for applicants to volunteer access, and that would be under a sort of voluntary arrangement or for the right reasons. And an access or an easement can be created under Section 348 of the Local Government Act. So that's where someone is just providing access without subdividing. But that would be through a sort of negotiated or other process, generally where it's volunteered or needed for a certain reason. Yeah.
So aside from the approach you described through subdivision, something involving land use wouldn't be held up if the property owner was unwilling or not in alignment with the totality of the public aspect, a public access aspect that was being proposed.
Yeah, that's correct. I guess if it's for a consent process and there were any particular values on a site that required access, whether it's an old gold mining site or something like that, not just iwi interest, but if that was a huge issue that needed to be addressed through a land use consent in terms of giving access to that resource, whatever it is there, then that might be imposed on that consent. It would be quite rare, I'd imagine. Normally it's something that's negotiated throughout the process before it gets to that step. I don't think I've seen it imposed on it as a consent without the applicant's agreement. Yeah.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just want to, I do want to foreshadow that one of the things I'd like to move is a resolution regarding earthworks. So I'm just, if I can just ask Mr. Campbell a question on page 9 of the report. You do say further consideration could be given to whether the other earthworks threshold for cut and fill 1.5 metre might be a more appropriate trigger, or that the two thresholds be conjunctive, i.e. the earthworks have to be both over 300 square metres and over a 1.5 metre cut or fill depth before the consultation with iwi is triggered. So are you suggesting that today we could resolve to do that?
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Again, this was one of the matters that we didn't get feedback from by today with Okaha. I think if they do come back and agreeing with that conjunctive suggestion, then it could be through a staff submission, might be more appropriate, just so we've had a chance to make sure that they consider that as a good trigger, having both thresholds in there.
Look, okay, we're told that we have to have expertise to defend positions. Is a requirement to actually identify the earthworks necessary, or is the only requirement necessary to identify earthworks needed on residential properties in the areas you've identified in your report? Is the only requirement for expertise in those areas that the expert has knowledge of Maori relationships with their ancestral lands and treasures? Or might it be appropriate for some expertise to be offered by way of people saying this is what you actually need to do earthworks in these locations?
I guess the 300 square metres and the other threshold around this waterway setback is quite generic, just to give an opportunity for comment. And I guess that the Runanga will have expertise saying in these areas identified, whether it's Kikanui, Shag Point, etc., earthworks in this particular location might be an issue, and this other location may not. Or the scale of earthworks may not affect the values there. What I've just tested with them is to say, does it also need to link to how deep people are going to be digging into the site as well, which is what we've suggested might be an option.
This is, I think this goes to the nub of the matter. If this were a private individual saying, hey, your rules are wrong, we'd say submit. That's the best way to deal with this matter from now on. This is clearly a matter where there are tiers or stratas of expertise required to inform a proper rule, the optimum rule under the Section 32 process. What we're saying is because one party that has some expertise in relation to this matter hasn't commented, we can't change things. And I come back to the point I was making at the very start of this conversation. That's not what we're saying to everyone else. So why can't we say to Ōkaha, we are changing this rule on the basis that some expert evidence has suggested it is insufficient, and you can submit on that in the notification process along with everybody else.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Hopkins. I mean, they have given us the advice that the 300 square metre and the 20 metre from a water body is the trigger that they want to be involved in. So they have already signalled that that's what the only two rules in terms of earthworks that they're interested in. They're saying all other earthworks in those areas they don't need to be involved in. What we're saying is, well, to avoid too many potential properties or consents needing to go to them, do we include the 1.5 metre threshold as well? So it kind of narrows it down to sort of those larger scale or more disruptive earthworks. So it's just suggesting to them that there may be a better threshold there, as well as the 300.
Councillor McCann.
Yeah, it's interesting talking. I think we've covered it all off, and Jim's far more eloquent than I am, but there's just too many if, buts and maybes. And on that decision, I would be prepared to move that we park the SASM chapter until such time as these concerns are raised or covered, or we get written assurance of what we're asking for.
So let me be clear, you're wanting to propose a motion that we park the SASM chapter.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think the appropriate thing would be to call for second. If there's not second, the appropriate thing to do would be to call for a second, and if there isn't one, the motion would lapse.
That's where I was going, but I just wanted to clarify exactly what Councillor McCone was saying. So you've heard what Councillor McCone is proposing. Does someone want to second that motion? Councillor Percival has seconded it. Therefore, we're going to have a vote. After Mr. Cook has given us some information. All right.
Firstly, I'd just like to clarify, when you say park it, you mean not included in the plan. And then I think it would be wise to seek officer / legal advice as to whether the plan would then be meeting its legal obligations under the RMA.
Actually. May I speak to that, Mr. Chair? That's an extremely good point, because I think was it the Kaipara District Council did something very similar to this. And I think the Environment Court ruled that they couldn't do it. Because I think they took, was it a SASM chapter or Outstanding Natural Landscapes? I can't remember which it was, but they took it out altogether and the court said, no, you can't. You have to have something in the plan.
Mr. Campbell.
Just further to Mr. Cook's advice, we have a recommendation from the subcommittee to council to include the SASM chapter. The recommendation from the last, resolution from the last subcommittee in November wanted us to explore further provisions in the chapter, which we've done in the short time frame. By itself, the short time frame has meant we haven't had a chance to fully go into them. We've made one suggested change. We've clarified a few things. I think the important thing is to note that it will probably never resolve outstanding issues that many people have with the chapter and the mapping. We know that is going to be an ongoing issue. So the resolution was quite ambitious, I guess, trying to resolve all outstanding issues, but we feel that some of those issues may have been clarified or further elaborated on. I don't think we've fully met that resolution, but we have attempted to in the time frame available. And yeah, I think if the whole chapter is taken out now, even with these changes, there's still an opportunity to look at that earthworks rule once we do hear back through a staff submission. Yeah, I think we're going to end up chasing our tails on this one if we keep trying to resolve it, because a lot of the feedback was remove the mapping, for example, and you've already cited an example today, Mr. Chair. So I don't know that it's possible to fully resolve the issues that was requested. We've done what we can in the time frame available. I know there's still concern that will be ongoing, that will be subject to submissions and hearings. So maybe that process is the appropriate one to kind of get it all out on the table and have a hearings panel make a sort of conclusive determination on it. And ultimately the Environment Court if it goes that far.
No, thank you for that explanation. Councillor McCann, I need to come back and we need to clarify exactly what your proposal was. Because when you say park the SASM chapter, we've already heard that case law says that we cannot do that in its entirety. So are you saying we park the chapter until this issue is resolved? Are you saying it's parked until we get a response? I think we need to be more specific before I put the motion.
You're exactly correct. So the resolution was passed in November that we look into these options. They haven't been answered, and so therefore I would say parked up until they are answered in writing from the appropriate people.
I'm just making sure that that's the governance advisor has that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I caught the first part of the original one, which was that we should park the SASM chapter until such time as these issues are raised, covered, and then there were other words that I didn't hear. But now this is a slightly different again. So do you have the motion written down, councillor?
Not yet.
Okay. It might be a good idea if we actually think about the exact wording that we need, and you may want to go back to officer comments as well. Thank you.
Campbell.
I guess, further to the governance advisor, just seeking clarification on the last part of that resolution in terms of the appropriate response in writing, or the response in writing from the appropriate people. I assume that's a response in writing from all kaha. And just on that, we've had a response on a couple of the suggestions, one of which they're happy with, changing SESM objective 5. They're happy to leave it as is, but with those other matters. We know their response on the mapping, and the only one we're waiting on is a response on that earthworks rule. So there is a mechanism by which we can change that rule through a staff submission. That would come back to council for endorsement. So I don't know, there's too many other things we could get a response on at this stage, knowing what the response will be on mapping.
Do you have something in writing now, Councillor McCone?
Not yet.
Councillor Hopkins?
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that we adjourn for 5 minutes while the member formulates a written resolution. Either that, or will you proceed on the basis of what we all think we understand Councillor McCone to mean, which is that Councillor McCone wants no further work done on the SESM chapter until more detailed advice has been provided by Okaha and others regarding outstanding issues in the chapter.
I would go with this.
Mr. Cook?
Field officers would need to have the outstanding issues defined a lot more, otherwise we could be coming back multiple times, and it leaves it very much open. David has already advised the replies that we've had from Okaha. So I'm curious as to what different replies you think we would get, and whether the replies are the ones that you will actually want to hear.
Just
All right. Look, we're going to take a 5-minute adjournment so that we can get some clarification as to what's coming out of this mud pool, and then we'll come back. And unfortunately, because we're taking an adjournment, I have to ask members of the public to leave the chambers while that adjournment takes place. Do you want to chair the meeting, councillor? Well, the answer is no. Well, we're still,
Hold on, we lost Mr. Campbell.
yeah, he's just, trying to wrangle councillor Principal. Welcome back, everyone. Sometimes the price of democracy is reasonably high, so we're sorry for that little bit of an interlude, but we just needed to get our wording correct. So we have a motion moved by councillor McCone, seconded by councillor Percival, and that motion is, Madam Chair.
That the District Plan Review Subcommittee agrees that the SASM chapter be deferred until further advice has been received from Ōkaha and others in writing in relation to the requests for information included in the November DPRSC meeting resolution.
Do members of the subcommittee want us to revisit that November subcommittee motion, or are you happy that you have a recollection of it? Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, I will be voting against this resolution for a number of reasons. Deferring or
But the question I asked, you do recall what the November
yes,
request was?
Because I moved. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah, I will be voting against it because my view is that parking this chapter would effectively park the whole draft district plan. And what appears to be the case at the moment is that certain parties are saying we're quite happy with the position that exists and we don't want to comment any further, and we will only comment at the notification stage. The comments or the questions, the points I've been making this morning are that we appear to be our process appears to be adopting a double standard in this, insofar as we're saying to quite a number of submitters, the appropriate solution to the issues you have is to make a considered submission at the notification stage. But in another context, we're saying to another submitter and participant, somebody who helped draft the chapter, oh, you've told us that you don't want to have further engagement until the notification stage. Ergo, we can't modify or amend anything because of that. Now, my view is there are going to be issues of contention in the plan relating to a whole lot of things. Medium density, outstanding natural landscapes, SASMs. There are a range of issues that will involve different points of view and different convictions as to what should be applicable and included in the plan. There is only one ultimate way that those matters can be resolved, and that is through the notification process. What I've been trying to say this morning, and I will continue to say, is that principle should apply to all the parties, including, if you like, Ōkaha. And I believe that the recommendation in front of us goes some small way to amending or to resolving some of the issues in SASM. I have foreshadowed that I intend to move some other resolutions this morning that may go further as well, if the other members of the DPR are willing to support them. And I believe that parking the chapter is not the appropriate response at this stage, simply because if the advice is not forthcoming, then the chapter never gets addressed. And if the chapter never gets addressed, the plan doesn't get notified or considered any further either. So it's a draconian measure that I think ignores two things. A, that we still have the power today to make further changes to the SASM chapter, and B, that it is, it will have ramifications and implications beyond the content of the chapter itself. So for those reasons, which I hope are considered and thoughtful, I will be voting against this.
All right, does either the mover or the seconder want to speak to the motion?
just in reply to that, we're going back to what we asked for in November, and we haven't had full insurance of it. We've had verbal, but not written, and written is what people refer back to, not the verbal assurances, which is what I am after, so that we can go further down the track with assurances to our ratepayers and the district.
Councillor Blackler.
Thank you. Look, there's aspects of many chapters that I have further issues with in terms of their impact and practicality around what's set out in the objectives, policies and rules. But I don't think it's fair to single out the SASM chapters singularly. Not to mention the fact that the chapter is so widely interlinked throughout the plan, and parking this will hold up the whole process, as Councillor Hopkins alluded to. But I do share the concerns of Councillor McCone around the willingness of Ōkaha's proactive engagement with us, and it's disappointing we can't iron out the some of the details and specifics collectively prior to the plan being proposed. But I will vote against this motion.
All right, I'm going to put the motion after I've heard from Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of points of clarification and to supplement Councillor Hopkins' comments. When the hearing will consider all submissions on the plan, and when we get to SASM matters, the hearings panel will be asking officers to deal with those submission points and justify why things may or may not change. In terms of SASM provisions, Ōkaha will be asked to also be in that position to provide advice as to why or why not the provisions should be changed. So they will be, put on the spot, put it bluntly, in terms of justifying what is or isn't included. Same goes with the mapping. So a submission from a landowner or other party might be raised. That will have to be addressed through a hearing process and a report prior to the hearing be informed by Ōkaha. So they will be asked to justify those. They have provided in writing the response to the SASM 01 and 05 objectives that were discussed in the report, as well as the definition of Rakatira Taka, and agreed in writing to that change. The only thing they haven't come back to us in writing on is the earthworks rule. They have in the past in writing confirmed their position on the mapping. So I think other than the service level agreement, which does rely on the plan being notified, so we can say when we notify, now we've hit the button on getting a service level agreement. So it's a bit premature to get that sorted just now. So there's certain, timing issues with that aspect. They have provided responses in writing to these matters. The only one outstanding, as I said, is around the earthworks rule, which we do expect a response to, and there is a mechanism to address that through a staff submission if they do agree. If they don't agree to that change, then the chapter would, or the provisions would remain as is. So you're just sort of trying to round out that discussion that's where we're at with Ōkaha. At times they do have to defer to the Runanga for further advice on some things, which is the case for the earthworks rule. The other matters they have considered in terms of a planning response and consistency response in terms of what policies and definitions say. So we do have that relationship with them. They did respond pretty quickly on this. We didn't have much time, notwithstanding the earthworks rule matter would require more time for them to come back to us on. So just bear that in mind. It has been a tight turnaround for this. As I said earlier, it won't resolve all the outstanding issues, and that process down the line, as I alluded to before, will involve Ōkaha fronting up to deal with submissions and responses to those to a hearings panel. So they're not completely off the hook in that respect. They will be required to provide that advice going forward.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against?
No.
No. I declare the motion lost.
With your permission to advance the process, I would like to move the first of the number of resolutions that I would like to test the mood of the meeting. First resolution actually essentially follows the recommendation in Mr. Campbell's report, but with slight changes. The resolution I'm moving is that the District Plan Review Subcommittee recommends that Council amends the definition of rakatira taka in the draft district plan as follows, and then in the context of resource management, the mana or authority to exercise a relationship between Kaitahu and their ancestral lands and resources. It includes the active involvement of mana whenua in resource management decision-making processes that affect these ancestral lands and resources.
Obviously you have that in writing that you'll be able to provide that with
Yes.
to the governance advisor.
Well, I'm not sure that I need to. It's effectively what's on the very minor amendments, but I'll draft it up if you wish.
Through you, Mr. Chair, he's added 2 extra words into that,
Yeah.
and it's just a change structure.
Well,
I
no.
believe I have it, but it would be good to have it emailed to me anyway.
Oh, it's
Thank you.
proper.
Thank you.
You'll get it in about 30 seconds, Ainsley.
Campbell,
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I think those additions are not problematic at first glance. We can certainly double check with Ōkaha, but I don't think they represent a major change to the sort of overall meaning of rakatira taka in my understanding, but I can check with them. Yeah, I don't think it takes away from what's stated there.
Mr. Chair, if I may speak to the matter, I think I thank Mr. Campbell for his comments, and I would agree with him that what I am proposing, or what the resolution, the slightly amended resolution proposes, does not in any way alter the well, it does slightly, but only in the interest of specificity and precision. Talking about Kaitahu and ancestral lands and resources could arguably imply that the ancestral lands and resources in question relate to others other than themselves. And I just wanted to repeat the word ancestral at the outset, at the conclusion of the definition, with regard whether it says affect these lands and resources. And I just think, again, for purposes of clarity, I just know how courts rule and work, and I've seen decisions that just explode in people's faces depending on the use of a word or the absence of a word. And for those reasons, I would like to add those particular points of precision. This is a matter of where cultural sensitivity and cultural expertise is legitimately entitled to be required and has been received. But I do not believe that this committee or this council is bound to include in the SASM chapter only things that one of the parties involved in the preparation of that chapter has endorsed. I go back to the point I've been making over and over again. If it's good enough to tell a lot of people that the solution to your issue is put in a submission when the plan is notified, we, I believe, are entitled in the act and in terms of constitutional process to say the same to Ōkaha. They're an advocate. They are not drafter of the document.
thank you, Councillor Hopkins. You've made that point consistently all morning, and I'm sure that we've all taken that on board. Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, thank you. Just further to my previous comment, the advice from Ōkaha also referred to the Otago Regional Policy Statement, where it talks about rakatira taka. It does have the wording around with their ancestral land, so it's consistent with higher level regional documents as well. So they're happy. I think we'd be happy with that, given it's in the Otago RPS.
Right. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Linwood? I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Would you like that recorded? It was passed and councillors Percival and McCone want their vote against recorded.
Mr. Chair, I will now move,
Only if I allow you.
Oh,
to,
sorry,
but that's
yes.
fine. I'm going to.
yes, Mr. Chair, I will now move with your permission and consent. I had foreshadowed that I did want to move some additional resolutions. I will now move that the District Plan Review Subcommittee recommends to council that SASM Chapter Objective 1 should read, and then the following words will apply: the Rakatira Taka of Mana Whenua over their significant sites and areas is recognised, and they are able to exercise kaitiaki taka in Crown lands or lands identified in treaty settlements and within those areas and elsewhere in those areas by agreement with landowners.
Again, councillor, do you have that written down that it can? The prolonged silence. Councillor, we do have a solution. That you could provide these to the governance advisor who could write them up while we have a brief recess for a lay down, a cup of tea and a chocky biscuit.
Okay.
All right, well, we're going to take a brief 10-minute adjournment for morning tea. Hopefully, councillor, that will give you time to pass that information to the governance advisor.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We've hopefully got our motions organised. Councillor Hopkins.
Would you like me to read the one I've moved so we can see if there's a seconder? Right. That the District Plan Review Subcommittee recommends that Council amends SASM Chapter Objective 1 to read: the Rakatira Taka of Mana Whenua over their significant sites and areas is recognised, and they are able to exercise kaitiaki taka in Crown lands and lands identified in treaty settlements within the SASM overlay and elsewhere within that overlay by agreement with landowners.
Do we have a seconder for that motion?
Councillor Blackwell also seconds.
So, Councillor Hopkins will just reread that for Councillor Blackwell's benefit.
And I'll go down there and make absolutely sure. Right.
Okay.
Right, this is the resolution I'm proposing. That the District Plan Review Subcommittee recommends that Council amends SASM Chapter Objective 1 to read: the Rakatira Taka of Mana Whenua over their significant sites and areas is recognised, and they are able to exercise kaitiaki taka in Crown lands and lands identified in treaty settlements within the SASM overlay and elsewhere within that overlay by agreement with landowners.
All right, we've have that motion proposed. Do we have a seconder for it? Councillor Linwood's going to second it. I thought for a moment it was going to lapse, Councillor.
May I speak to it, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Well, essentially it goes to the heart of the conversation we have had this morning and the outstanding concerns or attempts to address some of the outstanding concerns that continue to be raised. The way the wording of the objectives currently reads, I believe that they could imply, even with the qualification elsewhere in the chapter, that the laws of the trespass laws apply and take precedence. I believe they could be interpreted or construed to mean untrammeled or unqualified access. My view is that I believe that our Section 6 obligation to recognise and provide for an issue of national significance, I believe in so doing, we are entitled to actually look to the Crown for some guidance and some sense of or to inform the decision we make as to how we do indeed implement or uphold the principles of the treaty and indeed the requirements of Section 6 of the Act. And all I'm doing here essentially is saying there is an unqualified right in relation to lands the Crown has already incorporated in treaty settlements and any other land that might be included in those settlements, but everything else is conditional because there are issues of property rights raised by individuals and also flagged by the Crown as a matter that they will be addressing in the context of their RMA reforms. And I simply want the objective to make it clear that access is not unconditional and unqualified, and that certain entitlements relating to private property title do apply. And that the access in those settings should be consensual and not, if you like, an automatic entitlement determined by one party alone. I think there are two parties involved in this, and there is a level of expertise related to the common law and going right back to Magna Carta, if you wish, that relates to matters other than specific and particular issues of the expertise associated with ancestral lands and treasures.
Mr. Campbell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Councillor Hopkins for the proposed changes. I think we have to be a little bit careful and considered here in terms of starting to split it out in terms of Crown lands, treaty settlement lands. If it's land identified in treaty settlements, then I'd expect that Ngāi Tahu and the Rūnaka would have automatic exercise rights of access. So I don't think it needs to be an objective in the plan. Where it splits out or stating that they are able to exercise kaitiaki taka in Crown lands, I mean, that's an obligation between Crown agencies and Runanga anyway. I don't know that our policy needs to try and usurp or change that relationship. And then the other addition at the end around elsewhere in those areas by agreement with landowners, it has kind of been covered, I guess, in the other matters we talked about with public access. So again, this was traversed with Ōkaha. I think the preference would be that where we have a note, and this is in the report in front of you, it talks about, this is on page 8 of the report. So it says the provisions in this chapter do not override the provisions of the Trespass Act 1980. There is no general right of public access across private land. It might be a useful addition to actually include the last part of the proposed wording in that and potentially state something along the lines that, where access may be required to exercise those, well, it's a Rakatira taka probably in this case, but it might say where access is required or sought, it will be by mutual agreement. So it could be added to that wording so that it's clear that there's no access right pertaining to these provisions that Trespass Act presides, and where access is sought, it has to be by mutual agreement. And that would cover Crown land as well, because everyone's got general access rights to Crown land, whether it's national parks, etc. The exercise of any sort of customary practices would be by agreement of either the Crown agency or the landowner in those regards. So whether it's harvesting, mahi kai, that type of thing, you and I can't just go and do that on Crown land, whether it's national park, and any arrangements that DOC have with iwi would be need to reflect that as well. So I think we have to be careful as to what the purpose of the objective is seeking to do, but we can, I think, clarify that access arrangement in the wording or the highlighted clarification that sets out what those expectations are. I think that's probably a better place for it rather than an overriding objective. They're kind of there to set the scene. The notes across the whole chapter can kind of cover that matter clearly, I think. That'll be our preference, I think, at this stage.
Well, I think that's very good advice, Mr. Campbell, and it's obviously the reason that you are the planning manager. Councillor Hopkins, are you prepared to take Mr. Campbell's recommendation by way of an amendment?
Well, I thought I was until the very last sentence or two that you shared with us, David. I thought originally you were proposing an amendment to the wording of the objective, but it did seem to me at the end you were saying the objective didn't need to change. So, if you are saying you'll be willing to amend the objective, I would agree. I just want the objective to more clearly signal the qualification that is captured within the note, and also in that, comment you draw to our attention, there is no general right of public access across private land. Now, if I heard you correctly, what you're suggesting is that objective 1 could read: the Rakatira Taka of Mana Whenua over their significant sites and areas is recognised, and they are able to exercise kaitiaki taka within the SASM overlay, full stop. Where access is required for this purpose, it will be by mutual agreement with landowners. Which seems, that's what I thought you said. And is that what you said? And if so, would you be willing to have that as the objective?
I think the wording, almost just before we get to that part, talks about the SASMs twice. It talks about, in the first part, over their significant sites and areas is recognised. And then what you've added is within the SASM overlay at the end. I think it almost doubles up. So I'm not sure it's quite needed twice, but we just maybe think about that. What I'm suggesting is that last addition and elsewhere in those areas by agreement with landowners is probably not good wording for an objective. It's better sits as a note of advice in the chapter. Because this is talking about how the objective is implemented or enacted, which is not the role of an objective. So I think it's important to split that out in terms of saying, if you're clarifying how this is going to happen, that can be listed in the plan elsewhere, which it does for the other matters around trespass and access anyway. So it would sit nicely to add to that sentence. And that covers the whole chapter then, not just that objective.
Look, apologies. The spirit of the proposal you're putting to us makes perfect sense to me. I still believe there is a perceived or potentially perceived conflict between the potentially absolute statements in objectives 1 and 5, which I also foreshadow I intend to move resolution in relation to, and some of the other content of the chapter. What I am trying to do is build a qualification into objectives 1 and 5. And if you think that, and I accept the point you make about the Crown lands, and I did give consideration to that point, but it seemed to me that the very point you were raising, that these things actually already apply, meant that the statement was basically really nothing more than a reinforcement of the status quo, and the regulations and issues that apply. It doesn't create new obligations for the Crown or for us. But I would be willing to amend the amended objective, but not to leave it as it is worded now, because I believe that there is this implicit absolutism in the wording that I think needs to be qualified.
Anyone else have comment? Or go back to Mr. Campbell.
Thank you. And yeah, I understand, Councillor Hopkins, where you're coming from there. I guess the thing we have to bear in mind with plan provision drafting, particularly objectives, is they are high level. They set a scene. The provisions that follow, whether they're policies, rules, etc., are how things are exercised and carried out. And importantly, that note is for the whole chapter. So it covers all objectives, all policies, all rules in terms of access, which is why we put it in there. Okara are happy with that as it stands. I don't think they would have an issue with adding that extra wording around where access is required. It's by mutual arrangement. That's whether it's Crown land, council land, private land. It covers all aspects. I think it would sit better there from a plan drafting perspective. It's complete for the whole chapter. Yes, the objectives and policies kind of set a high level expectation around how iwi wish to exercise the rights as inferred by the Act. And it's not about sort of giving unfettered ability to use land or require it. And there's pretty well tested case law in terms of how that's applied for existing plan provisions elsewhere.
Councillor Hopkins.
Mr. Chair, to advance this matter in the spirit of cooperation and goodwill, I'm willing to, with the approval of the seconder, to amend the resolution, but not change it, not delete it entirely. And the amendment that I would be willing to propose in response to Mr. Campbell's comments, and noting that officers can submit on this matter, given that it's a recommendation from the subcommittee to the council, the amendment I would propose is that Rakatira Taka of Mana Whenua over their significant sites and areas is recognised, and they are able to exercise kaitiaki taka within the SASM overlay, with the proviso that where access is required for this purpose, it will be by agreement with landowners. I note that the seconder is nodding, so that with movement, if you'll accept that, Mr. Chair, that'll be the amended resolution.
Thank you. Can you just repeat that, please, then, councillor? Because this is what we'll be voting on.
The District Plan Review Subcommittee recommends that council amends the SASM chapter objective 1 to read: the Rakatira Taka of Mana Whenua over their significant sites and areas is recognised, and they are able to exercise kaitiaki taka within the SASM overlay, with the proviso that where access is required for this purpose, it will be by agreement with landowners.
All right, there being no, sorry, councillor Blackler.
Could I ask a question, Mr. Chair, in regards to that, Mr. Campbell, that do you feel that that still reaches the same problem that you highlighted before around wording within the objective that would be better placed somewhere else?
Yeah, I think the advice still stands. I mean, there's various provisions that implement the objectives and policies. So there's rules, non-regulatory methods. There's the note we've already got in there around access and trespass. So I still consider that this latter part of the objective wording would better sit with that. If it ends up in the objective and gets dealt with through submissions, hearings, who knows where it might end up. But if the wording's in there somewhere, that's probably important. My advice is that it should be in a different part of the chapter.
So supplementary to that, do you have any recommendations for us around how you could incorporate the intent behind Councillor Hopkins' proposed wording there into somewhere else?
Yes, so as I mentioned on page 8 of my report to today's meeting, it has that existing note in this chapter. I think just adding to that note would be sufficient to capture that, and again stress that it would then apply across all of the SASM provisions, not just this objective.
So what you're proposing is that the text of or the underlying principle that Councillor Hopkins is expounding would follow on from Trespass Act 1980. There's general right of public access, no general right of public access, and a mutual agreement will be required to grant access.
Yes, I think that the third sentence could be but basically the last part of the reading, where access is required for exercising, I might change it to say where access is required for exercising Rakatira taka or other kaitia taka. That will be by mutual agreement with landowners. So it could be sort of all encompassing.
All right, just before I give you the right reply, councillor, is everyone else perfectly clear that we have a motion that is going to change an objective of the policy? We have a recommendation from Mr. Campbell that it would be more efficient for it to be attached within the policy. All right, councillor Hopkins.
Well, Mr. Chair, speaking to that, in my view, if we're going to change the policy, then we can and should change the objective. And I would also make the point, and I just encourage members of the District Plan Review Subcommittee to contemplate this. This is a recommendation from the subcommittee to the council. It will come with a report from officers, and Mr. Campbell may well give us a detailed, more considered, and indeed written proposal to amend the policy he refers to, SAM policy 9, access. He may also propose further amendments to the text of the chapter that may obviate the need for this amendment to the objective. But in my view, if officers are saying that policies can be changed to be more qualified and conditional, then so can objectives. And all we are doing is inviting the council to consider this matter. And I accept Councillor Lackler's point, but essentially, if there are concerns that officers raise, they will have a perfectly considered opportunity to bring those to us. And I promise them that I will consider all arguments with an open mind. I'm not predetermining this matter, and I do accept there is merit in what Mr. Campbell is proposing. But in the absence of specific amendments to the policy, and given the broad principle that you can change the objective of policy, then I would argue that we can also contemplate changing the objective, the content of an objective. I would encourage members to vote for this at this time.
Yes, you certainly can.
Just in around the context of making the decision around the way I vote on this, Mr. Campbell, with respect to the Kaitahu treaty settlement, didn't it provide for Rakatira taka across the whole of the South Island anyway? In which case, Councillor Hopkins' proposed wording kind of is at odds with the outcome of the treaty settlement.
I don't have that settlement word in front of me, but there's probably a valid point that if there's higher level rights inferred by other agreements, there is still the general access provisions, Trespass Act, all that sort of thing that underlie that, regardless of whether it's treaty settlement, a regional provisions or a district plan provisions. Those access rights would still be inherent regardless. So I think Councillor Hopkins is trying to clarify that through the objective. I'm just suggesting it might sit elsewhere in the plan. Yeah.
All right, there being no further discussion, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? All right, so, well, there's been 4 votes for, an abstention and 1 against.
Chair, with your permission, I will now move the amendment.
You can, but I'll just explain why I voted against this. It's a bit like a bill passing through Parliament. There's several readings to go to. And I believe that this will struggle for support at a full council with a briefing paper, because we're possibly overstepping our bounds. But that's a technical planning matter, not. All right, the floor is yours again, Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the considered explanation you've given us. And I think both of us here are actually engaging in these matters in an endeavour to resolve conflicts and issues in advance of the notification process. And I think we're both also very mindful of the constraints within which we operate through the RMA and other parliamentary provisions. The second resolution, or the next resolution I would like to move is as follows: that the District Plan Review Subcommittee recommends that Council amends SASM Chapter Objective 5 to read: mana whenua are able to access waihi tupuna for customary purposes and are able to use Mahika Kai resources in accordance with tikaka as provided for in treaty settlements and otherwise by mutual agreement with land owners. And I've changed one word there, Ainsley, from property to land, just to be consistent with one.
Do we have a seconder for that motion?
Do you want me to read it again?
No, not having a seconder, I declare the motion elapsed.
What? Did you just second it?
Oh, sorry. When I looked at you the first time, you had an expressionless face. All right, so it's been seconded by councillor McCann.
Well, speaking to it very quickly, again, I can imagine that officers might say objectives shouldn't be qualified or should be more broad brush. But I believe the clarification that I'm proposing could and should resolve some of the concerns about the perceived unqualified and incontestable nature of access that the current wording of the objectives may imply or may be construed by some people, including, heaven help us, the courts. Again, I would just say to the subcommittee members that this is a recommendation to council, that Mr. Campbell, Mr. Cook and others can present arguments, maybe proposing amendments, further amendments to policies that would circumvent the need to change the objective. But it is essentially just qualifying Objective 5 in the same way that I propose that we qualify Objective 1, and simply establishes that these entitlements to access waihi tupuna and use Mahika Kai resources are by agreement with landowners. In other words, that it is not an unconditional and unqualified entitlement.
I understand and accept that, but it's also a replication of what is already there. When we had the fact that these rules don't supersede the 1980 Trespass Act. It's simply adding more context to it, and I appreciate that. Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hopkins, for the further consideration of this objective. Again, going back to my report, the policy that directly relates to this SASM P9, and it basically states maintain existing access opportunities, that's where they're already in place, and encourage enhancement of access for mana whenua to identified waihi tupuna for customary purposes. And again, it goes back to the earlier discussion around how that access may be enhanced through things like esplanade strips, other private landowner or Crown agreements, that type of thing. And again, the previous advice on the with agreement of landowners, I mean, if that was in the note, it covers all the objectives and policies irrespective. So I think we're ending up almost cluttering up the objectives, repeating that same wording throughout. So that's probably going to be our advice going back to council if this passes. There is a place in the plan to state that, which we have, so it wouldn't be lost entirely in the plan. But yeah, just prefer that it would be taken out of the objectives and put in a different place so it covers all of them, rather than sort of cluttering up the wording with all that wording added to each one.
Councillor McCann.
Yeah, the reason I second it is exactly as you said, for clarification. Whether it clutters it up or not, it brings it to the forefront and it gets realised to where it's going to. And if we can, as Jim has already said, it'll come back to another meeting with recommendations, and then we might have a direction for it to go to, but at the minute it's on the page. It is being written about and will go somewhere and get done.
Councillor
If I may exercise the right of reply, again, I accept Ms Campbell's point, but I would reiterate the point I made in response, namely that if we can produce policies that are qualified and conditional, then I cannot see why conceptually we can't produce or craft objectives that are conditional as well. And to the extent there is public anxiety about the wording of the objectives currently, and to the extent, and I believe if you look at the wording as currently produced in objectives 1 and 5, and I'm not proposing changes to any of the other objectives, I believe it is possible to draw the conclusion that objectives 1 and 5 propose an unqualified or non-negotiated right of access to land that the parties that are seeking access may not own. And that, in my view, there are issues here, if you like, relating to common law, relating to hundreds of years of precedent relating to property rights and the like. And so you have a conflict between areas of expertise. And we've so far the chapter has only considered expertise in one context, that is expertise in relation to Maori's the Maori relationship with ancestral lands and taonga. My view is that the other matters can and should be considered, particularly in light of the government's proposal to strengthen property rights as part of their amendment through the RMA. This simply heads very tentatively in that direction. And once again, if officers believe there is a better way to actually achieve the objective that I'm trying to, which is to resolve anxiety and explicitly impose constraints upon an entitlement, then I welcome those suggestions and proposals when the matter comes to council. But I think this is a way of sending a signal to the full council, to our community, and, if you like, to Ōkaha.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? So again, the motion is passed 4 to 1 to 1.
Mr. Chair, with your consent, the final resolution that I would like to move is as follows, and this arises out of the conversation this morning, and it may well be subject to some panel meeting, but I think it will initiate a conversation. I'm moving as follows, that the District Plan Review Subcommittee recommends that Council amends SASM Chapter Rule 4 to read that the requirement to invoke iwi consultation in relation to earthworks on residential and settlement sites within the SASM overlay is triggered if the earthworks exceed 1,000 square metres and or a 3-metre cut, and the work involves land on a slope greater than 35 degrees.
Everyone perfectly understand that? Councillor McCone is going to second that.
Speaking to it briefly, I'd be genuinely interested in hearing Mr. Campbell's response. I'm relying here to some extent on advocacy from members of the community who would, because of their occupation and involvement in development and earthworks and the like, may be legitimately able to claim some area or level of expertise in this matter. And I think that level of expertise has not necessarily been applied to the rules relating to earthworks as they currently apply. And to that extent, I think those rules arguably might fail the Section 32 test. But this is an attempt to perhaps make the rule more appropriate and more usable for those who are likely to be involved in earthworks and activities of that nature once the plan is notified And again, I would invite officers if they have a view that there is an alternative solution that would be better, they can either propose it now or in their submission in their paper to council when the resolution, if it is passed, goes to council.
Mr Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Chair and Councillor Hopkins for the alternative. I guess the resolution proposes quite different thresholds that we have in the plan now, so we need time to go back and consider those. And just clarifying, is that earthworks only on those residential and settlement sites that have this as an overlay? So this is even higher thresholds than the rural zones as well in the current plan. So I guess we're faced with a dilemma of having to rework all of the earthworks provisions if it's wider than just residential and settlement. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, yeah, so we need a bit of time to look at those thresholds. We need to talk to Okaha. We are expecting a response back on the existing rural threshold. We can go back to them on this, but I don't know that we'll have a response in time to prepare it for the council meeting agenda for the 17th, but we can try. Yeah, I think it's probably going a next level above what the plan framework currently sets out. So yeah, I think we'd struggle to get buy-in on that one in particular, just in terms of the iwi side of it. So yeah, I'm not sure. We'd have to go away and see if there's any other, what the other plans around the country have in terms of those thresholds. I doubt that they're quite that high. My initial kind of look at it, but yeah, we can certainly look at that. But I don't know the time frame we've got that would be able to provide too much advice other than sort of seeing what others have done and potentially a response from Okaha. But given what the plan has in there now that they seem to be happy with, I don't know that they'll agree to sort of tripling or doubling some of those thresholds.
Thank you. I would imagine that the level of earthworks is such, there's not terribly many people building houses over 300 square metres nowadays. A lot of houses are built at 160 to 200. If there were major earthworks, that would be more associated with a large subdivision, which would go through a comprehensive process anyway. Yeah, I wouldn't be supporting this change on the basis that there are not a lot of 1,000-metre square sections available in this district, and to say to someone that you could do earthworks across the whole lot is, yes, unless someone's going to build us a new council building. I don't quite see the point.
Chair, you make a valid point, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to, and the seconder would be willing to accept a very slight amendment so that the resolution would read that the requirement to invoke iwi consultation in relation to earthworks on residential or settlement subdivisions within the SASM overlay is triggered if the earthworks, etc. So are you happy with that?
So the seconder has supported that. No further questions or thoughts around the table. Mr. Campbell, your thoughts? I presume what Mr. Campbell's checking on is that we could be putting a specific rule in this chapter that is in conflict with rules that are already in the earthworks chapter. Mr. Cook.
Could Councillor Hopkins just clarify, was it and or in terms of those provisions?
sorry, I'll read it again, that the requirement to invoke iwi consultation in relation to earthworks on residential and settlement subdivisions within the SASM overlay is triggered if the earthworks exceed 1,000 square meters and or a 3-meter cut and the work involves land on a slope greater than 35 degrees.
I'm not a geotechnical engineer, but 35-degree slope is quite a significant slope.
Look, may I speak, Mr. Chair?
Yes, yes.
I did say at the start of this particular conversation that it has arisen out of this morning's events, and it has arisen out of the comment that Mr. Campbell makes in his report that there is potential to amend the rules to relate to 1.5 meter cuts and other things. What I am trying to do is ensure that when this matter comes to council, the recommendation from the subcommittee is that the current provisions incorporated in SASM Chapter Rule 4 are not deemed to be appropriate by the subcommittee, and that the council wants, and that it wants the council to reconsider those rules. This is an attempt to do that. I accept that there may be arguments for actually modifying all or some of what I am proposing, but what I don't accept is that we should, simply because there may be contrary solutions, as clearly proposed by Mr. Campbell in his own report, that simply because there may be alternative proposals, that we should actually abandon the idea to amend the SASM Rule 4 conditions entirely.
Have you found the clarification you're looking for, Mr. Campbell? Certainly, councillor Hopkins, taking that out to 1,000 square metres means that someone in the residential area is going to have twice the amount of right to do land works than what is in our rural chapter.
Only with a subdivision. That's the change we've now agreed.
So I don't want to usurp the process, but all right, no, he's found it.
The existing or the rule is recommended in the subdivision chapter subcommittee. All subdivisions require consent. When you get to subdivision of sites containing all or part of a historic heritage item, a SASM or a notable tree, it becomes a discretionary activity. So most subdivisions are controlled. So that subdivision consent would go to the relevant agency that has an interest in whether it's Heritage NZ or Runanga. So I think that will deal with the subdivision and any associated earthworks with the subdivision regardless. So I don't know that the provision is needed because the subdivision chapter already deals with that aspect. So whether it's a subdivision with 300 or 1,000 or whatever the earthworks proposed is kind of irrelevant. It's already captured by the rule framework at the moment. So it sort of falls back to the existing advice saying if we can link the earthworks to a second threshold around the cut and fill depth, that might kind of address some of those other concerns. But I think earthworks associated with a subdivision are already captured if it's in the SASM anyway.
Chair, if I may briefly exercise my right of reply.
Yes.
Look, David, I accept your point, and I accept that perhaps what I'm proposing is not an optimum or ideal solution. What I'm really seeking to do by a way of moving this, and I encourage members to vote for it for this reason, is that I want officers to reconsider the rules, because we have, and the thing that disappoints me in this process is this, and you've said it a number of times, and I suspect it's an issue with plans around the country. Ōkaha don't agree, so ergo we can't do it. And I come back to the point I have repeatedly made, that this is not the approach we're taking with other people. And I think there is a legitimate reason here to review these rules, because there is a duality of expertise involved. Yes, you have the expertise required to make informed decisions with regard to the relationship of Maori with their ancestral lands and treasures. But there is also the expertise required to actually identify what is practical and workable for people building things in relation to the quantum of earthworks required before some consultation with a third party is triggered. And in my view, we as the authors of the plan are entitled, in response to the accepting the principle that alternative expertise has legitimacy and needs to be considered, we are entitled to amend the rules and say to Ōkaha, as we are saying to landowners and others, if you are not happy with this, come and tell us in the notification process. And what I'm simply trying to do here is move an acknowledged a resolution that I acknowledge is imperfect, but which I hope will trigger further consideration and improvement of SASM Rule 4. And for that reason, as I say, I encourage members to vote for it.
There's no further discussion. We will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against?
Yes.
So I'll declare the motion passed 4-2. I did. Yes. Oh, I don't mind, but can do. Well, that hopefully brings us to the end of the discussion on the SASM chapter. Mr. Campbell?
Just checking that the original resolution was considered all passed. Just double checking around the definition. Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
On the basis of the last motion that was passed, what Mr. Campbell and Mr. Cook might be able to answer, but what impact does that now have on the earthworks standards, which are potentially at odds with where that's landed?
It'll depend on the advice coming back to council.
All right, we'll move along to item 3.2, which is the confirmation of the minutes that we have received.
Chair, to expedite matters, I personally am happy to move the confirmation or the receipt of the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of November 2023. And what a thrilling meeting it was, vividly etched in my memory. But I do actually congratulate the author, I think it was Ainsley, of those minutes. I think they very accurately convey the intent of the meeting. I have shared with her a very small number of typos in advance. None of them change the content or the meaning, and both of us would agree to that, I'm sure. So on that basis, I'm happy to move the adoption of the minutes of the meeting held, the subcommittee meeting held on November the 21st, 2023.
Information. So you're just going past that.
I'm sorry, I've made a slight hiccup in that there was a report prefacing the minutes that we need to receive and note.
Those are two recommendations on page 14.
Through you, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair, there is a confirmation.
Oh,
of
sorry,
Overview report. I did put that in
No,
there
forgive
for
me.
you,
Yeah,
that you
no,
have
I'm
a
happy
lot of
to-
guidance in there and also the links for the members of the public and just so that everybody is aware where everything is stored at the moment.
I apologise. I'm happy to move recommendation 3.2.
And that's seconded by councillor Linwood. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried unanimously. So we move on to
Now, with your-
3.3,
Yes.
where we have the minutes that councillor Hopkins has eulogised about.
Well, I'm thinking.
No, that's fine. Yeah,
You know,
I agree with the sentiments that you expressed.
I'll move the recommendations as they appear on page 14 of our document. I'm moving recommendations 1 and 2.
Scott?
I'd just like to thank councillor Hopkins for acknowledging the work that's gone into these minutes. They're no easy feat.
Councillor Blackler?
Just, yeah, I echo the sentiments. I think it reflects the meeting well, but on item 6, the discussion on light chapter, I do recall asking some specific questions around seeking assurances around mobile plant and equipment in a farming context not being captured by that factor, not being captured by that chapter, and so yeah, I would actually like that to be noted in the minutes that conversation was had.
Can you give page?
It's on page 7, item number 6, discussion on light chapter.
Oh, councillor, I think you'll find it's where there's point D, and it talks about mobile machinery, ancillary and pest control.
Oh, I see. It says add something along the lines of mobile. Yeah. So I guess in a way this is seeking clarification of that.
Yeah, that's correct. We picked up that matter. Wasn't intended to capture, moving vehicles, cars on roads, that type of thing. So yeah, the request was noted and captured in terms of any changes made to capture, mobile plant equipment, vehicles on roads, that type of thing are excluded anyway. So it's consistent with that.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. My apologies. I didn't actually see item D there. Yeah. Thank you.
So we have moved and seconded that we accept and receive the minutes. All those in favour? Councillor Linwood. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried unanimously. We move on to item 3.4. Yes, you may.
I'm not sure whether it's to Mr. Cook or Mr. Campbell, but again, I regard the minutes of the meeting on the 27th of November as thorough and true and correct. And again, I'm grateful that they are all of those things. But I'm just curious to know what 1A means. Could that just be explained to us, please, before we vote on it? That's I'm talking about the recommendation on page 25.
So this is the recommendation from officers to merge 2023-013 with 2023 with 012. If I can explain that on behalf of our senior planner. That recommendation is because there is one name for that chapter and the accommodation section of it was moved separately. So the actual chapter is called the local centre zone, and basically the visitor accommodation section is part of that chapter. So we do not need to have the two resolutions. So what is being proposed is that the first one, 12, refers to local centre zone and the other one disappears.
Yeah, just to further add to that, thank you, Governance Advisor, on that clarification. I think the discussion was about the changes to the visitor accommodation provisions in that zone after we'd kind of dealt with the zone itself. So it's kind of making sure it's captured within the entire zone resolution, and the changes made to visitor accommodation are picked up as well. So it's just kind of for tidiness sake, really, noting that there was a discussion on that topic.
The discussion will not go away, councillor. It's just that there needs to be one resolution for the local centre zone chapter.
No, I get it. I totally get it. In other words, 2023 is 2023-013 is redundant because it relates to a subsection of the zone chapter, which is captured in 2023-012. I'm happy to move the two recommendations.
All right, so we have it moved and seconded by councillor Linwood. I will put the two motions. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried unanimously. Oh,
Yeah, so I don't think we can carry it unanimously, as I was on that committee for some of these minutes. I can't. But
yeah, thank you for reminding us of that at that stage.
If you've read the minutes and you're happy with them as a member now, you can actually still vote for them. This is about the accuracy of the minutes. You're now a member and you are entitled to vote. Whether you have read them, everybody has read them, so you are entitled to a vote.
suitably informed, thank you.
We do commend the member for his integrity and bring that to our attention. We move on then to 3.5.
Mr. Chair, apologies. These came to us reasonably late and I've been away for 2 days, so I haven't had a chance to engage with Ainsley. As a consequence, there are some corrections I'd like to make. If you'll allow us to go through those, or some of them relate to matters of meaning, and that's why I think they should be discussed.
So they are substantive, yes.
Yeah, look, I'll just, okay. Just going through them, I'm looking at the pages. This is page 37 of our agenda, or page 2 of the minutes. There's a reference at the bottom of the page to agreed amendments for the natural characters chapter. And then under B, change P5 by deleting the semicolon after the words and adding by using. So I think we need to say what the words are, because at the moment it said by deleting the semicolon after the words, what are the words, and adding. So that is a matter of meaning that I think needs to be corrected. There's another matter of meaning on page 4 of the minutes, or page 43 of the agenda.
Excuse
Under
me,
the-
councillor, could I
no.
have the item number, please? Because I
Well,
don't
there
have
isn't
the minute
an
in
item
front of me.
number
at
in
the
this
moment.
context, sorry, it's a heading discussion on the noise chapter. Third paragraph. Members of where standards noise 1, it says maximum noise level at or within boundary, it should be one or the other, cannot be both. Officer advice, national boundary is a national policy statement. And I'm pretty sure that should be notional boundary, but I'd be guided by Mr. Campbell on that matter.
That's correct.
Yeah. So that was on page 39. I do apologise. There's another correction on page. Oh no, so the correction on the next page is a typo. So if we go to page 43, under well, again, there's discussion on the notable trees chapter. Halfway down the page, action officers to check. And then it says, officer advice, re-arborist matter. The planning manager did not believe that could be written into the plan. Members' response, this is being raised because of the redwood situation in Timaru. A local arborist has indicated that they would not complete the words, but an out-of-town arborist was happy to sign it off as being unsafe and needing to be removed.
I believe the word words should be works, councillor. Is that
Yes.
what your point is?
Well, but also, sorry, yes, it's one of the points. But also I'm just trying to, do we really mean the redwood situation in Timaru, or I just think there needs to be a little bit more clarification or amplification of the information there. And when I read it, I thought, you know, what are we talking about? Was my question.
Mr. Campbell has a response.
I think it picks up the difficulty of capturing some of the discussion, and it may miss out some words, which is often the case with this type of thing. So redwood is a tree species, so it could be just clarified because of the redwood tree situation in Timaru, so it's clear what it's about. We don't have to go back to what the exact situation was, but it's just referencing an earlier example, I think.
Thank you.
So if it says because of the redwood tree situation in Timaru, it'll be fine. And then noting that correction to words to works
Yes, I
as
got that.
identified. Yeah, thank you.
Now, Mr. Chair, these are questions again, well, they're possibly follow-ups rather than anything else, and I'm not sure the minutes can necessarily cover the matter, although I'm looking here at page 44, and under discussion on the subdivision chapter, the very last sentence says, regarding a rural lifestyle block of 3,000 square metres with articulated water, officers will check whether that could be viable. And the action noted is officers will check. So, and there are a variety of other such matters on page 45 regarding amenity belts, 46, the same, no, sorry, 46 is a typo. 47 and 50. So it does seem to me that the matters where it says officers to check or officers to consider on those pages, at what point are we going to get will those matters which don't appear to be resolved in the minutes of the meeting, will they be addressed in the final report to council when the proposal to notify the plan is put to us?
So we would gone away to check or consider. We're not going to report that to council in every little instance, but the track changes versions will show where changes have been made. Where there's no changes, it won't be signalled. So it's kind of inherent that if a change has been made, we've considered it and made it. And no change is made, we've considered it and it wasn't made for various reasons.
The other thing, councillor, is Councillor Blackler and I were discussing on our way this morning that some of these things may actually come up in later minutes. that we're coming through. So we have to have some cognizance of that as well.
Well, Mr. Chair, those are the matters of meaning that I raised. The other questions are typos, and with your permission, if you're happy for me to just work with Ainsley on those very minor corrections, they involve things like semicolons that just appear randomly between two words and things of that nature. So, and I do give you an absolute assurance that they don't amend the meaning of the minutes at all. But what I would move perhaps is if we go back, can we go back to the resolutions and just amend them slightly to read that they confirm the public minutes of the District Plan Review Subcommittee meeting held on the 4th and 5th of December 23, as circulated as a true and correct record of that meeting with amendments and as agreed, with amendments as agreed, and then delegates to the Chief Executive,
And there be minor amendments and they're not agreed, so in consultation with me.
Yes, the governance advisors concerned that what you're saying is too broad, that we need to be specific about the amendments that we're asking her to make.
Well, I mean, in the end, do you want us to go? Do you want me to go through the typos and those things today at the meeting? Or
No,
in the end? Well,
no, we're happy with the process.
yes.
It's the wording.
If I may suggest something here, councillor. So as circulated as a true and correct record of that meeting with minor grammatical amendments to be considered by the governance advisor.
No, we have discussed today some changes and we have agreed to those changes and they are matters of meaning. National becomes notional. There's a reference to the redwood tree. These are changes in the meaning of the document.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were talking about the ones that you're going to bring to me. My mistake.
I mean them both. I mean the meaning of the agreement, the amendments today, and those of minor nature that will be discussed with the governance advisor.
So you're covering off both in the same motion.
Correct.
That's the clarity I was seeking. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? I'll second that from the chair. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. There are further minutes that arrived late that would require us to make a decision as to whether we can action them today. If you follow through on your agenda, there's a resolution to accept or defer late agenda items.
Chair, I don't see I've got minutes from the 21 Nov, 23, 27 Nov and 4 and 5 December. That's all I've seen. What are these other minutes that have arrived?
Well, on the front.
Yes, I am.
Well, the opening page of the agenda is in part 1 and then part 2.
Sorry, that's agenda item part 2, which, yeah, I hadn't seen. Sorry.
All right, well, I understand that we're calendared to finish at 12:15. We only have 15 minutes. It may be pertinent to leave these minutes for the alternate meeting next week. Councillor Blackman?
Yeah, I agree, Mr. Chair. I just wondered if I could raise one one item that I would like checked out, which might give us some time to do that in between times. And
If you, a question for Mr. Campbell, is it?
it was just on page 6 of agenda item 2. Under the discussion on rural zones chapter, the last paragraph. Yes, yes. Oh, sorry, yeah, I'm giving out the wrong page number, aren't I? Page 11.
Correct.
Yeah,
Which
so this is from the 18th of December.
It's page, no, but he's passing a question on to Mr. Campbell.
I was just wanting the minutes to better clarify the last paragraph at the bottom of to capture the intent of the discussion better. So I think the time in between now and then would allow us to do that, is why I was flagging it now.
So that you're talking about the discussion around gradient.
Yes, and in the introduction, I believe my recollection was that I was bringing across the point that in a more extensive agricultural setting, there's a continuum of productive outcomes and ecological outcomes happening alongside each other, and so I think it's important that that's recognised. It's not one or the other in the context of extensive farming systems.
Yeah, I do recall that discussion, Councillor Blackler. I think again, the difficulty of capturing that kind of through the minutes is tricky sometimes. So we were talking about that kind of transition in the high country from the higher, more extensive grazing areas to the maybe more intensively grazed and farmed lower parts of some properties. And I think what you did raise was around the fact that the more extensive grazing can have quite good biodiversity outcomes. Correct? Yeah, alongside farming, particularly for weed pest control, like so wildings, that type of thing, where the grazing can help.
That's correct. I just don't feel that reflects that conversation quite in that way. But yeah, it was just a point of clarification. Thank you.
Councillor Hopkins.
It's Chair, noting that Councillor Blackler and perhaps Mr. Campbell can assist with the government's advisor to amend that section. I would like in the meantime to move, going back to the urgent business recommendation, I would move District Plan Review Subcommittee decides pursuant to the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987, Section 46A7 and Council Standing Orders Clause 9.12 to defer the late agenda item as referenced above to another date via this resolution.
Seconded by Councillor McCone or Councillor Blackler. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. All right, I'll just draw the members' attention to the fact that we are calendared to meet again next Thursday morning. And please stay well in the meantime, because we need a quorum and we're running reasonably close to the wind. Thank you very much for staying up so late and watching proceedings, Katrina, and to anyone else out there online and to members of the public. As you will no doubt realise by the level of debate today, there is still a general desire from the subcommittee to ensure that we can get a plan that is both workable and acceptable to our community. I'll declare the meeting closed. Oh, sorry.
You're going to adjourn it. Are you probably having a new?
No. No.
So is
I'm closing today's meeting.
okay.